Let's talk tariffs, a tax on imports designed to make foreign goods more expensive and, in theory, give local products a fighting chance. Tariffs are one of the oldest tools in the economic playbook, used by governments to protect domestic industries from overseas competition. But while the idea sounds simple, the reality is anything but. By making imported goods pricier, tariffs are supposed to nudge consumers toward homegrown alternatives. Think of it as a nudge to buy local, whether it's electronics, cars, or even your morning jam. Imagine your Nan at the farmer's market, proudly selling her homemade marmalade, while the fancy French jam sits on the shelf with a higher price tag. That's a tariff in action, protecting local producers but sometimes at the cost of consumer choice and quality. Fast forward to May 2025. Donald Trump, never one to shy away from controversy, threatened a 25% tariff on any iPhone not made in the US. It was a headline-grabbing move, aimed directly at Apple, one of America's most iconic companies, and it sent shockwaves through the tech world. But this wasn't just about Apple. The threat was broad, chaotic, and unpredictable. Tariffs up to 50% on a wide range of European goods from electronics to luxury items. Suddenly, global trade felt like a high-stakes poker game, with billions of dollars on the table. The official justification? National security. The government claimed that tech imports, especially from certain countries, posed a risk. Overnight, your iPhone, something you use every day, was labeled a potential threat to the nation. The business world was stunned. Investors, analysts, and executives scrambled to make sense of the new reality. Stock markets wobbled, and uncertainty rippled through boardrooms around the globe. Apple, a company that had built a vast, intricate global supply chain, suddenly found itself in the crosshairs. The company's entire business model was being challenged, not by a competitor, but by a political decision. This wasn't just about iPhones or even Apple. It was a direct challenge to the entire system of global manufacturing, a system that took decades to build, connecting factories, workers, and consumers across continents. What looked like a simple threat was actually a tangled mess of politics, flawed economics, and a deep misunderstanding of how interconnected the world has become. The consequences were far-reaching, affecting not just companies, but workers, consumers, and economies everywhere. And at the center of this storm, Tim Cook, Apple's CEO, forced to navigate a minefield set by a politician who believed factories could be willed into existence with the stroke of a pen. The stakes? Nothing less than the future of global business. You'd expect a clear reason for a policy that could upend a multi-trillion-dollar industry. Trump's explanations for the Apple tariff all over the place. One day it was about raising government revenue. The next it was about bringing jobs back. Then, bizarrely, it was about fighting fentanyl. The rationale shifted constantly, making it impossible for anyone to take the threat seriously as economic strategy. This inconsistency didn't just confuse, it undermined the policy's credibility. It looked less like a plan to help the economy, and more like a headline-grabbing move to pressure Apple. Analysts called it erratic and damaging to his own credibility. Tariffs were presented as a magic fix for everything: revenue, jobs, public health, which simply isn't how economics works. The shifting justifications revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of tariffs. In the end, it was political theater, not practical policy. The promise was simple. Tariffs would bring manufacturing jobs back to America. But even Trump admitted any new U.S. factories would be automated, so much for millions of jobs. The dream of high-paying factory work was replaced by reality. A few people overseeing robots. The nostalgia for mid-century manufacturing jobs ignored the real culprit: technology, not trade deals. Trump also claimed Apple could just eat the 25% tariff or move factories to the U.S., but companies exist to make money, not absorb massive new costs. Inevitably, those costs would be passed to consumers, meaning higher iPhone prices. American products would become more expensive at home and abroad, making them less competitive. The plan to punish China would actually punish American consumers and businesses. Instead of a win, it was a spectacular own goal. The policy promised to help, but would have hurt the very people it claimed to protect. Why not just move iPhone production to the U.S.? It's a question that comes up every time there's talk about American jobs or global trade. On the surface it sounds simple. Just build the factories here, hire American workers, and make the iPhone a truly made-in-USA product. But the reality is far more complicated. Because Apple's supply chain is a global, intricate web connecting dozens of countries and thousands of suppliers, every iPhone is the result of a vast international collaboration, with each part sourced from the place that does it best. No single country can make an iPhone from scratch. It's assembled in China, but its parts come from all over the world. The glass might come from Kentucky, chips from Taiwan, sensors from Japan, and rare earth elements from Africa or Australia. China's role is final assembly, relying on a massive, skilled workforce and a dense network of suppliers located just miles apart. This proximity allows for rapid problem-solving and efficiency that's nearly impossible to replicate elsewhere. Replicating this in the US would require building hundreds of factories, not just one or two, and training hundreds of thousands of workers from scratch. It's not just about the buildings, it's about creating an entire ecosystem that doesn't currently exist. The cost and time would be astronomical, years, if not decades. Billions of dollars would need to be invested before a single phone could roll off the line, and the risk of failure would be high. The US simply doesn't have the infrastructure or workforce on the scale Apple needs. Many of the specialized skills required for electronics assembly have faded away in America over the past few decades. The main Chinese plant, iPhone City, employs over 200,000 workers, impossible to match in the US today. The sheer scale and speed of production are unmatched anywhere else in the world. Trump's "build it here" demand wasn't just difficult or expensive, it was fundamentally impossible. The idea ignores decades of economic shifts and the realities of how modern technology is made. The reality of global manufacturing can't be changed by political will alone. It's shaped by economics, logistics, and the expertise built up over generations in different countries. Apple's system is a product of decades of global cooperation, not something you can relocate overnight. The iPhone is a symbol of globalization, built everywhere, for everyone. Facing a threat to its business, you might expect Apple's Tim Cook to go on the attack, but that's not his style. Cook chose quiet diplomacy, working behind the scenes rather than engaging in public fights. He built relationships with policymakers, explaining the complexities of Apple's supply chain privately. Instead of public statements, Apple let industry experts explain why moving production was unfeasible. This indirect approach kept Apple above the political fray while making its case clear. Cook's strategy was to educate, not confront, protecting Apple's interests without turning it into a political football. By refusing to be drawn into a public war of words, Cook maintained leverage and kept communication open. It was a high-wire act, but it worked. Apple's position was understood without a single dramatic press conference. Sometimes the most powerful statement is to say nothing at all. Apple wasn't alone in its alarm. Other industry leaders were even more vocal. Across boardrooms and conference calls, a chorus of concern echoed through the American business landscape. Executives from nearly every sector, from tech to manufacturing, were suddenly united by a single, urgent refrain: these tariffs could spell disaster. CEOs from classic American industries like Ford's Jim Farley warned that tariffs would devastate U.S. manufacturing. Farley, representing one of the country's most iconic automakers, didn't mince words. He described the proposed tariffs as a direct threat to the jobs of thousands of American workers and the future of the auto industry itself. Farley said a 25% tariff on goods from Mexico and Canada would blow a hole in the industry. He explained that modern car manufacturing relies on a complex web of cross-border supply chains, and any disruption could grind production to a halt, leaving factories idle and workers without paychecks. Logistics and shipping leaders pointed out that tariffs on industrial imports would raise costs for American factories, making exports less competitive. They warned that higher prices for raw materials and components would ripple through the entire economy, squeezing profit margins and forcing companies to make tough choices about hiring and investment. The domino effect, higher costs, disrupted supply chains, and harm to American workers and consumers would be felt everywhere, from the assembly line to the grocery store. Everyday Americans could soon face higher prices and fewer job opportunities, all because of a policy meant to protect them. This wasn't just a Silicon Valley issue, it was a broad-based concern across the economy. Leaders from agriculture, retail, and even small businesses joined the outcry, emphasizing that the pain would be widespread and indiscriminate. The united front from CEOs made it impossible to dismiss the criticism as whining. This was a rare moment of solidarity, with fierce competitors standing shoulder to shoulder, all warning of the same looming threat. The message was clear: these tariffs would backfire, hurting the very sectors they were meant to protect. Industry leaders pleaded for policymakers to reconsider, arguing that the long-term consequences would far outweigh any short-term gains. The business community's opposition was a powerful signal that the policy was steering the economy toward disaster. Investors, analysts, and workers alike braced for the fallout as uncertainty began to ripple through financial markets and boardrooms. The engine room of the American economy was sounding the alarm, and the message was unmistakable: proceed down this path, and the consequences could be catastrophic for everyone. Overseas, the European Union's reaction was one of exasperation. The threat of 50% tariffs on EU goods was seen as economic aggression, not negotiation. The EU, a unified economic bloc, refused to be bullied and warned of retaliation. Trade experts predicted a tit-for-tat trade war, hurting both sides. The EU's approach was structured and rules-based, clashing with Trump's chaotic style. The result? A stalemate, with both sides digging in. A sudden jump from near-zero tariffs to 50% would be a massive tax hike for American businesses and consumers. The EU knew the pain would be felt in the US as much as in Europe. Their refusal to play along was a calculated bet that the US would blink first. The risk of mutual economic harm was simply too great. So, who pays for tariffs? The answer is simple: you do. Despite the rhetoric, the cost is passed to American consumers. A 25% tariff on iPhones means higher prices at the store, not a check from China or Apple. This applies to everything: cars, clothes, food. Tariffs mean higher prices across the board. Higher prices lead to fewer sales, which can mean job losses, not job creation. Companies in Apple's supply chain would also face higher costs, risking layoffs. Tariffs act as a regressive tax, hitting lower-income families hardest. For many, a price hike means making do with less. The policy, sold as helping American workers, would actually hurt the most vulnerable. Tariffs are a tax on the very people they claim to protect. In the end, the plan to force Apple to build iPhones in America collapsed under its own weight. The economic logic was broken, automation meant no jobs, and Apple couldn't just absorb the cost. The business community's united opposition made the policy politically toxic. Experts and Tim Cook made clear you can't just move Apple's supply chain to the US. The EU's resistance and the threat of a trade war raised the stakes. The reality tariffs would mean higher prices and job losses at home. What began as a loud threat fizzled into a quiet lesson: global economics can't be changed by tweet.